Why, hello, everyone. My name is Rich Portelance. I am your host of the EdGate Powers Podcast. With me today is Peter Coe. I want to welcome everyone back to our podcast series where we are examining the structural decisions shaping the future of education. Today's conversation, I believe, is an important one. It dovetails on the conversation I had last week with Zarek Drozda, who is the executive director at Data Science for Everyone at the University of Chicago. And our guest today, Peter Coe, is a leader working at the intersection of curriculum strategy, workforce readiness, and institutional transformation. Peter has spent years helping institutions rethink how programs are designed, aligned, and measured, especially as technology, AI, and quantitative demands reshape nearly every industry. Because the real question is, are we aligning curriculum to what sounds innovative or what students will actually need to do? And more specifically, are we building the mathematical and analytical foundation required for the modern workforce? Peter, welcome to the podcast. I'll give you a second so you can introduce yourself and then we'll jump in.
Well, thanks, Rich. Hi, Peter Coe here. I currently serve as Interim Math Director at Student Achievement Partners, where we are constantly thinking about the questions that Rich was just naming. How do we prioritize and modernize expectations for mathematics learning to acknowledge the world around us, which is changing rapidly, and happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder to everyone, Peter will be on the podcast, which is March 25th. There is a link in the description below. You can register. Please join us. It's going to be a great conversation. Also joining us will be Zarek, as mentioned before, Hillary Rinaldi from Whiteboard Advisors, and Larry Johnson from EdGate. It's going to be a terrific conversation. So, Peter, to start, when institutions want to be future ready, what do you think they often misunderstand?
That's a good question. I think that institutions carry some risk that they don't consider a balanced approach to the future, right? I think, our world is changing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to toss everything out that's come before. I think when we consider, say, the role of AI that's shaping the future, I think, there's a great conversation happening around durable skills and the ways that, say, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, right? Those want to play a larger role in the kinds of educational experiences we provide. And it still means that our students need to reason quantitatively. It still means that students need to have a depth of mathematical understanding, analytical skills that are going to be required to work with, yes, a technologically enabled modern workforce, but not. It doesn't mean we forego those skills. So I think it's a really difficult balance as far as acknowledging the ways that things are changing, and really still ensuring students get the depth of understanding that they are going to need to be successful in the modern world.
Well, that was terrific, and thank you for the answer. And you actually covered, I wanted to kind of direct that into the realm of mathematics, and you did it naturally.
Sure.
Are we undervaluing quantitative reasoning in non-STEM pathways? If kids are going in different directions.
Are we undervaluing? Is that what you said?
Yes.
I think there's a risk there. I was actually just having a conversation with my wife actually about the way that we're using AI in our professional lives. And, the question that we were discussing was, does the presence of AI in our professional existence mean that we need to know less about all of the, the quantitative, the communication, like all the skills that we've developed over the last 20 years. And we both said, no. In fact, if anything, it means that we have to be sharper. We have to, for lack of a better phrase, we got to be smarter than the machine, right? I think, we are, in the same way that, when I taught students, they were using calculators. This was 10, 20 years ago. And one of the things I noticed was the ways that a calculator can really lead you astray. And that's some pretty old school technology there. But, what I came to understand then, and I think is still relevant today, is that using technology in your academic setting, in a professional setting, really does mean you have to be ready for that machine to make an error, for you to commit a user error and recognize that. And so I think that in the same way that having calculators has not really diminished the need for grown-ups and evolving students to deeply understand numeracy, I think the same is true as AI and other tools are making, algebra and work with functions easier for us. It means we still need to be real sharp. So I do think there is risk in saying, because these tools exist, students no longer need a depth of understanding of algebra and other fundamental skills.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You almost compare it to a carpenter using a hammer. There has to be a certain level of expertise if you're going to truly command that tool, whatever tool it is. And so if we don't understand and can't command AI, there's a huge risk with that, right?
Yeah, and just add on to that, and I think understanding how the tool works, right, is I think another dimension to that, right? I think there is even today with the way that folks are using AI, I think knowing that AI is essentially predicting based on large volumes of text and other resources that it's consumed helps users know how to treat it and interpret the results. So I fully agree, and I think there's the skills around the tool, but even knowledge of the tool itself is important.
Yeah. And do you see there's strong signals of positive change happening right now? And also, do you see complacency? Or that's a juxtaposition, right? It could go both ways. I'm curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, well, I think from a national perspective, sometimes asking what education is like in the United States is kind of like asking what's the temperature in the United States, and the answer is, realistically, we've got 50 states and a very decentralized system, and so I think the answer to that question is going to be yes in some places and no in others. So I think some of the momentum that we're seeing is around durable skills. I think that's a clear trend as many states adopt graduate profiles and graduate portraits. They are concretely naming the ways that these very important skills should be built over the course of a student's K-12 trajectory. I think at the same time, from a mathematical perspective, you're seeing also efforts, one, to name what's important, right? And I think that high school mathematics has rightly been criticized for a long time as being sort of a diffuse set of, vaguely related ideas. So I think we're seeing many states make efforts to say, hey, we're going to put some stakes in the ground. Maybe there are 50 standards in this course, but these are the 25, these are the 30 that are most important. And then I think the other component to that is folks really rethinking this unilateral path to calculus. And I'm sure Zarek had a lot to say to you about the role of data science and how many states are considering the ways that may play a larger role in a student's high school trajectory. So I think there's ample opportunity right now, and our hope at Student Achievement Partners is really to try to see where that consensus is and build momentum around those key ideas.
Yeah, fantastic. And Zarek did mention durable skills, and Hillary and I, when we spoke last year, we talked about Portrait of a Graduate as an important component and how those durable skills are coming to bear in that program. And I could probably have like 3 or 4 different tangential conversations with you on some of those topics, but I do.
Happy to. Yeah.
I want to talk about curriculum design a little. Many institutions update programs by adding new courses, AI, data science, emerging tech, but they really rethink math and analytical foundations underneath them. Is that a mistake, or is that?
I think so. Yes, I think that when it comes to math content, excuse me, there is this urge to add more, right? And in almost any context, I can think about my own time as a curriculum developer when part of the team wanted a course to focus in area A, the other team felt like area B was more important to resolve the conflict. We just put both in, and that is, works on the development side, and can you could even argue that maybe users would want that, like, hey, there's choice A, choice B. I could do either one. I have more resources, more that I can expose my students to. But I think the reality is that when I talked about high school math being this large, diffuse set of learning objectives, it presents a real challenge for folks. That, I think my hypothesis that about the lagging achievement that we're seeing, I mean, obviously not only in high school, but definitely, especially in high school, is that we are really not paying heed to the depth required for students to really understand the core mathematics that they're learning, right? The difference between tackling, 50 learning objectives versus 25 in more depth is really stark. And I would definitely urge everyone to think about, from whatever vantage point you're in, how can I bring more focus to the learning experiences we provide for students? And that doesn't mean, the argument on the other side of that would mean, well, we're taking stuff out, we're lowering expectations. That's not at all the stance I'm taking, right? I feel like having students work in depth and from different angles, right? Work with, say, a quadratic function that is, building students' fluency in being able to graph and manipulate those expressions. Also building students' conceptual understanding. What do these parameters mean? And in a modeling context, right? How can I use this function to understand the real world and answer questions? So I think, instead of adding more, my approach would be to really think about how can we do more with less, right? And help students build that deeper understanding.
So all of that learning projects forward into the future for every single learner when they step into, graduation and employer expectations. Where's the biggest quantitative skill gap between those graduates and what employers are expecting today? Yeah,
well, I really think it's two things, and I've sort of briefly touched on both of them, I think, but one of them is this idea of durable skills, right? Which is another place where you can encourage depth, right, in the curriculum. So in that example I just gave of working with quadratics, sorry if people aren't into math, I'm putting them to sleep by talking about quadratic functions here, but not only building that depth of understanding, procedural skill, ability to model, but thinking about ways that students could develop collaboration skills or communication skills, right? This could be an opportunity for students to write a report summarizing findings for a particular audience, right? So I think that first gap really is around the durable skills, and especially as we acknowledge the role of more technology. The human side, I think, is really where employers are seeing that gap. So not only can students, yes, I still want the quantitative skills, I still want the analytical skills, and I want people that are comfortable sitting in a conference room together, grappling with a challenging problem, having that resilience, and being able to communicate their results. So I feel like, especially when we talk about high school mathematics, if we increase depth, what opportunities does that afford us? Can we imagine a modern version of high school math where students, alongside the mathematical skills, are having those opportunities to really collaborate, build resilience, and communicate results? I think the other is probably, and I know Zarek spoke to you, the other is probably data science, and the ways that so many roles right now are relying on employees to grapple with really messy data sets, right? I think that the age of clean word problems, a data set with 2 columns and 12 entries, right? That's really not kind of where we are today as far as what employers are looking for. So to me, those are kind of the two major gaps. And what I'm hopeful about is the ways that if we can really build consensus around a core set of mathematical expectations so that educators and developers don't feel like they have to teach 100 things in 100 days, then we can really build time for those more relevant opportunities.
So, and Zarek did mention the same thing, that the existing kind of construct needs to be adjusted. In terms of scaffolding curriculum, how do we embed mathematical reasoning across disciplines? Is there kind of some thought process and how we do it in a more level fashion so that it's not all just embedded into math curriculum?
It's a good question. I would say that it is, I think the math classroom is still the primary place where students are going to learn these things. I think there are opportunities for interdisciplinary connection, especially when you think about a science or technology class. I think that is a little bit of an untapped resource that we don't see. High schools today are still pretty siloed places where teachers are not necessarily collaborating in that way. But, to use that quadratic functions example, I think there's a great opportunity there for connections to physics and other disciplines. The durable skills really are, I think, the real fertile ground for connection, and thinking about the ways that, if we are working together on a real world problem involving quadratics and we're writing a report summarizing our findings, right? Is there a place where literacy can play a role? So I think, in the modern workforce, it's never, here, go solve this sheet of word problems and come back to me in an hour, right? People are bringing all their different skills to bear on a particular problem. So I think the more that we can offer students opportunities like that in high school, the more prepared they'll be.
And are you seeing any institutions that are doing this well? Are there any examples out there that you said, all right, this kind of group or this state is starting to get to the right place?
I think trying to think of a specific example. We've got a report out right now on durable skills that names, I think, a few states that are not only naming durable skills, but also naming specific connections to math, places like Colorado, Idaho, Massachusetts, South Carolina, Tennessee. So I think there's, a handful of states that really are at least setting the vision for the ways that we can really purposefully not only attend to these durable skills, but make sure that they are also showing up in math classrooms. So I think there are some states that are showing real leadership there.
And is there and you might have answered this. I guess I want to just get a little bit more specific about institutions prioritizing those durable math skills and thinking and the modeling, statistical reasoning, etc., over narrower technical skills.
Great question. And I feel like it gets this idea of balance, right? I think sometimes we become very enamored with a phrase like critical thinking or creativity, right? And we forget that there's actually a big knowledge base that doing those things requires. You'll forgive me, but I always return to this example from The Simpsons, which is when, I don't know if the audience is aware of this, but there's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer is invited to design a car, and he, spends all this time thinking and comes up, and his prototype is the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. It's like barely a car, because he's like, well, you should put a doorbell on the side and add this other thing. I can't do it justice, but Google it, you'll find the picture. And that always reminds me that, Homer may be creative, but what he did not have is knowledge of, how to build a car, how cars work, what customers actually want in the car. There's a ton of knowledge that's required in order to innovate, in order to collaborate, in order to, these durable skills require foundational knowledge. So I really, and I recognize I'm saying this in a field that is really prone to pendulum swings. That just seems to be what we do. That I think we don't want to have a pendulum swing that goes very far astray from the core mathematical skills and understandings that we know students need to have in order to be successful. So I think the two words I would use are really focus and balance. So we do want to stay focused on a small set of skills in each course across the mathematical pathway, and we want to have balance with not only those core mathematical skills, but also new forays into durable skills, into that messy data science work. We want to resist the urge to just kind of throw it all in a blender and see what happens. We also want to resist the urge to say, well, actually, we don't need students to understand functions anymore, or we don't need students to be able to solve a 1 or 2 step equation anymore, because computers can do that, or employers don't want that, right? Those skills are still going to be relevant and enable our students to be successful with data and really tie mathematical understanding to durable skills.
So if you've jumped into the middle of this episode somehow, I want to remind you that on March 25th, Peter will be joining us on the EdGate webinar, where we will be talking about the future of curriculum and how things are changing. He'll be joined by some other great panelists: Hillary Rinaldi, Zarek Drozda, and Larry Johnson. But I want to go from K-12 to higher ed for a second. If you were advising a university president today, what 3 structural curriculum shifts would you prioritize immediately, especially related to math data and analytical rigor, where you have most of your expertise?
That's a great question. I might have to do a little jotting to make sure that I remember three of these. I think, yeah. All right. Well, so I think one of them would really be to pay heed to data science, right? So we know that introductory college courses very often are named things like college algebra, pre-calculus, and we want to retain that option for students that are on a path to calculus and want to remain on that path. But I do think we want to open up our introductory offerings to make sure that we have other pathways that might enable a student to move towards algorithmic thinking, working with data, the kinds of skills necessary for that messy workplace I was talking about, right? Those gigantic data sets that are so prevalent now in today's modern workforce. So I think that would be one. I think the other would be to pay attention to the overlap between those introductory courses and the experiences that students are having in high school. We've got a great report out that actually examines that overlap between introductory college courses and high school mathematics. And I don't know if you'll find the results surprising or not, but there's a lot of overlap between, say, college algebra and the expectations of high school mathematics. Even for a course like pre-calculus, really a lot of overlap with high school math standards. So to think about, how can you upgrade, update those courses? Yes, if students are placed in that course, it's probably because they would still benefit from exposure to those skills. But how can you think about ways to present that content, the learning experiences students might have that will help connect them to the real world, to the workplace, rather than just be sort of a warming over of content that they've seen before, which is not really going to inspire anyone to do their best work. And I think the last one would be to explore more of a co-requisite model. I think colleges are quite enamored, and I'd say math educators generally are quite enamored with this linearity of content, right? You must pass through hoop A before you get to hoop B. However, I think there's been a lot of promising results from colleges that have said, hey, actually, if you could take these two courses at the same time, you will see the relevance of maybe the review or the more remedial course, and you'll be more successful in a course that's new to you. So I think thinking about exploring more co-requisite models would be my third.
Okay. Our Q1 theme is about alignment, not just innovation. And, we talk about at EdGate, alignment as infrastructure, something that's, can't just be done in a haphazard way. There has to be, a structural integrity to what you do. Why is it so difficult for institutions to align math departments, program leaders, workforce partners, and administration around shared outcomes?
That's a great question. One I ask myself a lot, I think. I think there's a few. I mean, I think one is that, the math wars are real. We may be in the midst of one right now, or there may be skirmishes happening, or maybe it's sort of a brief interregnum, but they're always with us, right? And I think there really are, in ways that are different from other subjects. I think there are a lot of deeply entrenched beliefs that are in opposition to one another, right? Whether it's direct instruction versus inquiry-based learning, whether it's procedural skill versus conceptual understanding, whether it's the path to calculus versus a focus on data science. So I do think that kind of no matter what the person or people in charge are saying. I think individual schools or educators are enter every math learning space with pretty deeply held convictions about what's going to work and what's the best thing for kids. And so those those kinds of beliefs can be really challenging to unpack and address from afar. So I think that's one alignment challenge. I think another one is that in math, the details really matter in a way that I'm not sure is the same as other fields. I was just giving that example of quadratic functions. I won't put everyone to sleep by talking more, but just to think about a topic, you could have quadratic functions on your syllabus, and some people will read that headline and think, oh, okay, I know what that means. That means doing a whole bunch of factoring and completing the square and solving equations using the quadratic formula. Someone else will read that and think, oh, that means I want students to solve real world problems by graphing and use technology to interpret the results. And so I think especially in cases where an institution is leveraging, say, multiple curricula, right? I have this core curriculum, and then students are going home and they're practicing with this digital platform. And hey, they all, my syllabus said quadratic functions, the curriculum said quadratic functions, and their supplementary practice resource said quadratic functions, but they're actually all saying pretty different things about quadratic functions. And so those details really do matter, and it can be hard to rally everyone around a clear common vision about what do we really mean? What are the outcomes that we care about?
And I guess in that space and paradigm, where do most transformation efforts break down?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, where do they break down? I would say that in many cases, they don't even really start, unfortunately. And so it's not necessarily a case of breaking down, but it's, I think, beginning with a really clear vision. And when I say a clear vision, I mean, the documentation, the communication that can break through the noise of the math wars and acknowledge the different viewpoints that people may be bringing into an effort, right? I think that's really, really important, not to just say we're going to do it this way, but to actually acknowledge the different viewpoints that people may be bringing. And then secondarily, it's really the level of detail and specification required to clarify what do we mean by this expectation, right? I think the Common Core state standards in high school are really not immune from people having wildly different interpretations of what a particular standard might mean. So I think people need clear language. They need a lot of exemplars, right? Really specific examples, and I don't just mean like one or two. I mean a real wealth of exemplars that can help people understand not only what does this expectation look like, say on an assessment, but also what might a classroom level activity look like? What does student proficiency look like? There's a lot of questions that people are going to have about any expectation setting, and unfortunately, those don't always go answered.
So if you had to make a recommendation in order to achieve quantitative readiness, so what would you say to institutions that what that alignment should look like?
Yeah, I think it really is starting with a clear and compelling vision that is focused and balanced, right? Those are, I'm going to draw on those two words I said before, right? This is where we want our students to be. And where we want our students to be is not a list that is 100 items long. It is, I'll just say, shorter than that. I'm not going to give you a number, but it's a short list that you could fit on, let's say, 2 pages, that acknowledges not only the durable skills and the demands of the modern workplace, but connects those to the core foundational mathematical understandings that we know are important. And then really goes into some detail via concrete examples, right? Show me, don't tell me. What are the kinds of tasks that you want students to do on what time frame? What are the associated teacher actions, the assessment items that might assess whether students have met those expectations? That's really the starting place. And from there, that allows you to develop criteria for developing curricula. But I really think that clear and compelling vision with details attached to it, I think, is important.
And do you believe that there is a good and proper way to assess how the analytical curriculum is actually aligned to workforce demands? Is there a way to kind of put that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need more. I think we need more stakeholders at the table, right? I think that one of the great privileges I've had over the last couple of months is to be engaged in multiple focus groups that I'm leading with SAP. And so I'm talking about conversations with classroom level educators, but also with school leaders, with district leaders, with state supervisors of mathematics, and also the post-secondary community, right? And so I think what we need is more conversations and collaborations that bring together these different groups of people, at least at the beginning, where we can all say, hey, if a student could meet this bar, if a student could do this and meet this expectation, that would be a great signal that they'd be ready to move on and ready for the next phase of their life in college and career. So I think we don't do enough of that. We don't have enough of those conversations where the people that our K-12 students are moving on to next. I think we need to give them a stronger voice and a stronger role in this process.
So Peter, for presidents, or I should say for leaders in secondary education, where should they start if they suspect their math and analytical preparation isn't aligned to future workforce needs?
It's a great question. I think I would start by considering work in your own state. And I know that may sound silly, but I would investigate a little bit. As I was saying earlier, many states have developed some resources that are connecting K-12 work to durable skills, to a more modern workforce. If you happen to live in a state that's not doing that work, I'll give a plug one more time for we've got a great publication that really kind of summarizes where that conversation is right now at different states. So that could be a good resource for you as well. But yeah, I think it's a matter of really taking a look at your mathematics program and thinking about, where can we focus our time, right? What are the big ideas in each course? And then what are some opportunities for connections to durable skills that might be evident in that work?
So if just for the audience, if you follow Student Achievement Partners online, you can probably find some of those publications. If there's any links, Peter, we can always include them in the description too. Or the things that will be valuable to our listeners as they kind of explore, what Student Achievement Partners is doing and how it impacts curriculum today.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. We've got a page up. It's called Math That Matters. So yeah, learnwithsap.org/math that matters. Yeah.
Perfect. Any way or any early indicators that tell us that an institution is moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think so. One is that everything I said about the setting the vision, I think, is important, right? So if we see some indication through frameworks, through communication, through when we see alignment in the ways that a leader is talking about something and the principal and the teacher, right? I think when you see some evidence that vision is taking hold, I think that's a really strong signal. I think when we see, and again, I'm speaking my real bias here, but when we see people letting go of things, right? I think when we see people having the courage to say, look, this set of 80 indicators wasn't doing it for us. We're going to focus more deeply on these 40 or these 30. I think that's a really strong signal, as counterintuitive as it may be. But I think when we see people purposefully increasing focus, I think that is a really strong signal. And then the last thing I'll say is just, when we see coherent connections present, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's in a curriculum guide or a set of materials in an activity, right? So we're not saying here's where we do the math and here's where we do the durable skills and here's where we do the data science, right? But when students actually have these integrated, we see some evidence of integrated opportunities where I am learning about functions and the way that they're a tool for working with data, and I'm having opportunities to build resilience, collaboration, creativity. I think those are really the indicators I'd look for.
Okay, I'm gonna, and those are good durable skills to have. I agree. I'm going to put you in front of a lecture hall, and in the room are
you get nervous now. Okay,
faculty members who, and it could be interdisciplinary faculty members who want to be part of this transformation rather than resist it.
Yeah.
What advice are you giving them?
They want to be a part of it?
Yes, they want to be a part of it.
Well, keep working for me is what that'd be my first piece of advice. Don't go anywhere, please. I think my advice to them would be to play an active role in talking to your colleagues who might be more resistant, and sharing your why, right? Think deeply about why you want to be a part of this transformation, your rationale, and share that with colleagues as much as you can. And I think in particular, if you have a story about how you were resistant and now you aren't anymore, that is like gold. That is like the most important thing that people can share. I used to think, now I think differently, and here's why. I think I would also give them the advice to, I think, really look for and be able to name the positive changes that you're seeing in your students through transformational work. I think that with any transformation, there are challenges and there will be dips, and we may see moments and places where student achievement and learning may decline for brief periods. and we have to be obviously conscious of that and working to change that. And it's going to be really important for us to be able to name and tell stories of the ways that students are positively changing amidst a period of transition.
Okay, so that's you helping these faculty members kind of gain perspective to
Yep.
get to that next level. Now let's talk about 5 to 10 years from now, right?
Okay.
We are in the future. What does a
Yeah.
truly future-ready institution look like from your perspective?
That's a great question. I mean, I think a truly future-ready institution is always evolving, right? So 5 to 10 years from now, they might be having some of the same conversations, right? That's sort of the nature of the future. And I think given the rapid changes in our world we're seeing today, I think that's really a non-negotiable, that a future-ready institution is sort of always future-ready and maybe always evolving. I think about really kind of the reciprocal nature of teaching and learning, and the ways that an institution that is providing future-ready learning for students is also providing similar experiences for the grown-ups or the instructors, the leaders in that organization. I had a realization once, which is, we can't expect students to develop a deep intellectual life if their teachers don't have one also, right? Like, that's really not possible. So I would say that, if we are setting the conditions for young people to develop resilience, creativity, collaboration, we have to have those spaces for the grown-ups too, right? We can't treat instructors like widgets and give them firm directives and requirements only. We have to really engage them in similar practices that we do with students. So I think just that idea of always evolving, and maybe a different model of the way that the instructors collaborate, the way that the instructors communicate and do their work is also necessary.
So I spent a lot of years in advisement. I had a company called Career Path, and I spoke to counselors and advisors at different schools, and it was always it was apparent to me that it was almost impossible for them to advise a student on a career that they had no idea about. And as things were evolving, if we didn't keep them up to date on what was happening in the workforce, there was no way they were helping the students properly find those future-ready careers. So I agree 100% with what you just said. Is you got to train the trainers and get those people thinking. And specifically, what role does mathematics and quantitative reasoning play into that vision?
I mean, I think it's still this balanced approach, right? Where we have to keep our eye on the foundational skills and understandings, which haven't changed very much, and I suspect will probably not change very much over the next 50 to 100 years. Students' fundamental understanding and skills related to algebra, quantitative reasoning, functions, and sort of desperately have to pay attention on the other side with the ways that students are applying those skills in new academic contexts and new workplace contexts. So I think it's, when I think practically about what that means for an institution, I think about sort of constantly having routines that enable people at all levels to continue to engage with what makes math interesting and the timeless nature of mathematics, going back to, Pythagoras and before, right? And really to make sure that they are interested in those ideas, understand those ideas, and are ready to teach those timeless ideas in new and innovative ways, and also routines that help all of the leaders and instructors in that institution learn about the ways that those skills may newly apply to burgeoning fields. Today, we're talking a lot about data science. In 10 years, we may be talking about something else, but really understanding the role that those timeless ideas play in the future. And so opportunities to learn about what's happening at the post-secondary level, opportunities to learn about what's happening in the workplace. I think routines that engage people in that area are important too.
So I want to thank Peter for joining us today. We create this content for ed tech companies, publishers, educators, people in this space who need to create and build programs that meet the future-ready needs of our society and of our jobs, to help these students develop skills, durable skills that will last. And so, Peter, I want to give you the opportunity. Are there any final thoughts? Something that I've missed? We could have gone in a thousand different directions with this conversation, but is there any last thing you would want to say to the audience that you think is critical as we wrap the conversation?
Thanks for the opportunity, Rich. I can't resist the opportunity to double down on what I said about focus. I think those that know me know that this is a common refrain that I have, and that is really, no matter what happens, as things evolve and as we develop the urge to add more to our courses, add more to what we expect of students, we've still got to be able to say on a page or less, what are these expectations for students, right? We've got to find ways to deepen learning experiences, really with a smaller number of expectations, and I think that's where we're going to see true change.
So if you get the chance, everyone, join us on March 25th for the Future Ready Alignment, redefining curriculum for what comes next. Peter will be there along with some other great panelists. We hope we see you. There's a registration link in the notes below. Thank you very much for listening to the EdGate Powers Podcast, and we'll see you next time.